If you've got the Elgato prompter and the DJI Osmo Pocket, you might be wondering, can I use these two things together? And the answer is yes, but it's a little bit tricky. So I have found two ways that you can use these together that require you to buy little to no additional equipment, and that's what I'm gonna walk you through right now, starting with the more complicated way, my less favorite way, and then jumping into what is probably a more practical way for more people. Why I'm saving that one to the end, I don't know. So over here I've got two tripods, and that's gonna be the first method. This also works anytime you want to attach the Elgato prompter to a camera or a lens that the lens zooms or the front needs to focus and you can't really hang the prompter on the lens, or the camera has a weird form factor. Basically, you can split them up so they don't have to be connected, the prompter and the camera. And that's what we're gonna do with the Osmo Pocket right now. So the first step is to just mount the prompter itself to some kind of tripod or monopod. In this case, I'm just using a little travel tripod, but anything will work. It's usually better if you're able to have a tripod and a monopod, just because you can get things closer together that way, but you can usually make it work with pretty much anything. And so I normally do just have the prompter hanging off my camera's lens, but for both of these methods, we're gonna remove this back plate and use the shrouded back plate. This comes with your prompter, and it's the one that has like the biggest opening, and then you have the shroud right here to prevent light from leaking into the camera. So once you've got the prompter on a tripod and the shroud installed, that's when you can just put the Osmo Pocket on some other tripod. In this case, I'm using this monopod right here, which is probably like way more beefy than I need for this, but it's what I got, so that's what we're gonna use. And so now we just basically adjust the height so that the camera's looking through the middle of this opening, and make sure you're not using the wide angle lens attachment on the Osmo Pocket, because then you will really see the edges of the prompter in your frame, which you don't want. I'll start recording on the Pocket just so you can see here. I can pull the shroud back. You sort of see some of this reflection happening here, but once I cover this with the shroud, then that reflection disappears, and now you just have the prompter and the Pocket's looking through the prompter. And one thing, depending on your positioning of the Pocket, you might need to use the zoom a little bit so that way you don't get the edges of the prompter. In this case, I didn't have to, but if you're using a tripod that positions things back like this, you might have to zoom in a little bit if you can't move the camera forward like that, so that way you have the full clean frame. And then the other thing is, obviously you don't want face tracking turned on the Pocket or anything like that. You want the gimbal to just stay locked, because if it tracks you and moves, then it's just gonna see the inside of the prompter, and that is not what you wanna do. And that is pretty much method one of using the Osmo Pocket with the Elgato prompter. The thing that I don't like about this method is that it requires two stands, which is not outstanding. So there is another way to do this that is a little more complicated to set up, but I think maybe even a little simpler overall, probably for most of us. So what I really like about this second method is you can do it with what you have right now, probably. You don't really need to buy anything else or have a separate stand. You just need some kind of stand to put the prompter on. Probably whatever you already have it on will be good. It could be a tripod, a monopod. I'm using a small rig desk stand thing. This is like super inexpensive and height adjustable, and you know, it's pretty handy. So I have a nice tripod head that's strong enough to support the prompter. In this case, everything is just gonna be hanging off the prompter because we're gonna be using the camera platform that comes with the prompter. So normally when you use this, it attaches to the back of the prompter like this, and then you can move it up or down to kind of accommodate your camera. The problem with this is it is very plasticky, so it doesn't work well with heavy cameras like my Sony FX3 right here. It's just way too heavy to mount on the back here, so that just doesn't work out great. But smaller cameras and phones and action cameras and stuff, actually I have a whole video about how to mount all kinds of cameras to the prompter that aren't just the Osmo Pocket, so you can check that out. But this is a very useful thing. But if you have the Osmo Pocket, you know that it's kind of a tall camera. It's got an interesting form factor, and there's no 1/4-20 tripod mount natively on the bottom, so it does come with this little extension handle that you can clip on here, and then you have a 1/4-20 on the bottom, and the camera's a little grippier, but then it's quite tall. And if you have the Creator combo thing that has an extra battery in the handle, you can put that on there and get a 1/4-20, and then it's extra tall. And the problem with it being extra tall is if you take this camera platform, and even though you can adjust this, you can adjust kind of where it sits, if you put it at its lowest setting, this is just way too tall. And if I take this long battery out and just put on the short handle, this is basically as short as the Pocket 3 can be with a 1/4-20 tripod mount, and still way too tall to look through. So what you have to do is somehow find a way to lower this platform beyond what it's designed to do. And it's actually super easy to do that. When you mount your prompter to its tripod stand, just make sure nothing is sticking out in the back here. I have my tripod plate under it, so that way the back is nice and open. And so all you really need to do here is take this screw that mounts the camera on the top part of the platform, unscrew it, and then reverse it. So now it's weird because you couldn't attach a camera to the top, but that's because we're actually going to attach the camera to the bottom, because now when I put this here, I can put this at the lowest setting, screw this in here, and now I have a lot more room for the Osmo Pocket. So this is coming down a lot lower. There are a couple caveats, a couple warnings here. First, I don't have a backplate on currently. I would still recommend using the Shroud backplate. So one thing I figured out here is that if you're using the Shroud backplate, it works pretty well because this is so open. But if you're trying to use one of the other ones, like the lens mount backplate, for example, it doesn't work as well because there's just too many things that bump out. And what these do is then they make it hard for this to mount in a way that it's really not designed to. So this is a cool method because you don't need to buy anything extra, but there are two things that might make your life easier if you don't already have them. This is working fine and this screw's holding sturdy, but these screws that come with the prompter just aren't very long, and you probably don't want your very expensive camera to have any risk of falling off. So if possible, you can get one of these longer 1/4-20 tripod screws. I'll put links, of course. And this just makes sure that you have kind of a sturdier connection. So I can pop this in here, and it's just gonna let me make sure that this is even more firmly connected than with the default screw. So you don't have to do that, but these are so inexpensive that I feel like the peace of mind is really worth it. And now I can take the Osmo Pocket and basically just position it right here. I can turn it on. Now, if you notice, this isn't quite as perfect. This is still as low as I can go with this. I guess you could potentially maybe take a Dremel tool and cut out an even longer slot here so you could lower this down more. But this does still work. So if I start recording on the Pocket, this is what it looks like. Obviously not ideal because you can see the top of the prompter here. So I have an idea to deal with that less than ideal situation. You can basically just tilt the gimbal down a little bit. Ooh, that's way too much. And then you can zoom in a little bit. And now here I am talking into the Osmo Pocket through the Elgato prompter, and it should look pretty decent, and you don't see any of the prompter framing or anything. If you don't want to deal with zooming and cropping in the Pocket itself, you can always do that in software. You can run it through something like Ecamm or OBS and then digitally crop in, or just your editing software if that works too. The last thing here, the last piece to this puzzle though, obviously when the shroud is over here, I can't see what's happening in the camera. But I feel like most of the time, especially if you're using the prompter, the camera's probably connected to your computer or a monitor or something like that. And so you can still run a USB, but this is like if you give a mouse a cookie, it just keeps causing more and more problems. There's not a lot of space to reach the USB port, which is in the front here. You could flip the camera around, and I guess that would work, but then it's just harder to access the controls and stuff. So here is the other thing that I might recommend you buy if you don't already have one. If you have the Osmo Pocket positioned this way, a regular USB cable is just a little tricky to fit in there. So what you can get is a right angle USB cable, and then you'll be able to put the cable in there, position the camera still how you want it, and then you can plug this into your computer or whatever it might be. So you would really have two cables running from this, one for the camera and of course the one for the prompter itself to connect to the computer and the software and all that. And now you've got the Osmo Pocket powered, connected to your computer, and attached to the Elgato prompter, and that is pretty awesome. And speaking of things that are awesome, I would like to promptly thank all of the members that help support my channel through YouTube channel memberships. It makes a world of difference, and if you want to learn a bit more about the Elgato prompter, including how to mount pretty much any other type of camera to it, check out these videos right here.